Anyway, combine stuff happened.
Yeah.
The eternal debate around here at the office, what does it mean? What do we do with all this stuff? We're a data-driven company. Our grades are all based off of pure on-field production. You know, at the heart of it, this is what we believe in, right? That on-field production is going to be the biggest indicator at the next level. I still look at it a little bit like class, college class, right? A college class, you might have 3 exams that make up 90% of your grade, and then 10% is like class participation or just attendance or something like that. It's only 10%, but you still want to do well at that 10%. That's where I think at all the stuff on the side, the athleticism, the interviews might hold more weight than we know, just because guys are all over the spectrum as far as, how crazy they are and how, dedicated they are, all that type of stuff. But where do you think the athleticism stuff, that whole component, comes into play here when we're talking about production and on-field and what a guy's going to do versus how well they work out?
I think there's probably a few things affecting everything. Like, nobody is getting drafted 100% because they ran a 4.3, right? So that part of things is just kind of silly. I think what the combine probably can do is apply a very real threshold of athleticism which you need to clear in order to be taken seriously as a prospect, right? So PFF is grading college players against college players, and you could potentially be a phenomenal college player who just doesn't have the required athleticism to make a jump up to the NFL where players are bigger, stronger, and faster. And I think we can probably figure out down the line where that line is. So we can say, okay, this guy's got amazing PFF grades, but he runs slower than Steve, so he's probably not, an NFL caliber linebacker anymore.
I'm fast.
Yeah. And I think we'll figure out where those lines are for each different position. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do. Then I think at that point, there may be guys who get boosted up a little bit because they're special athletes, guys who are just breaking the numbers and going off the charts. A Julio Jones style guy who was able to have, his testing was insane, even though he did it with a broken foot. And now we're seeing at the NFL level, he is probably the freakiest wide receiver in the league. He is the closest thing to Randy Moss we currently have in terms of being completely uncoverable because he is such an athletic specimen. So I think at either ends of the scale, you get some stuff that's useful that can change some perceptions a little bit. Everything in the middle is probably more or less the same, and it shouldn't do anything other than kind of raise reasons to go back to the tape. If a guy runs something dramatically different to what you thought he would, well, okay, why has that happened? Or if a guy, if there's a number that stands out as weird, I think it should basically force you to go back and recheck things, but it shouldn't be completely changing your evaluation of a guy.
Yeah, so using that percentage breakdown that I'm saying, let's pretend production, 90% might be extreme, but production's the majority of what we're saying. There's a lot of people that are deconstructing things the other way and saying, okay, here's this baseline of Julio Jones type receivers and AJ Greens and Odell Beckhams or whoever the successful receivers are, and saying, okay, they ran this, and they're comparing their 3 cones and all this stuff, and they're trying to essentially reverse engineer good players in their combine numbers. Now, so you're almost starting from that point. Whereas we're gonna reverse engineer good players versus their PFF college grades and use that as a starting point. So an example like Julio Jones, we didn't have PFF college grades for him. I assume he would have graded pretty well. Myles Garrett, guy that graded well. Last week when I interviewed Lance Zierlein, I brought up Myles Garrett versus Rashawn Gary. If you're doing this from a production standpoint, you'd put Myles Garrett and Rashawn Gary together. Garrett's way up here and Gary's low. Garrett's good, Gary's low. And then you compare their measurables and they're the same, right? So if you're starting with measurables, you're like, oh, they're in the same tier. And you'd almost expect the same thing. And then maybe use the tape as a tiebreaker, where we're going to use the tape, which we've quantified, our quantified film analysis, which we believe to be very, very good. We use that to start, and then it's like, oh, by the way, they're the same level of athlete. So I think we just come at it from a different way. Is that the right? I think that we think that's the right way to do it. Other people do it kind of backwards. Well, is that a fair way of laying it out?
I mean, I think the bottom line is we're going to be using data scientists to actually look at all this stuff, grades, athleticism, whatever it is, and find out what the stuff is that matters.
Right. And we've just scratched the surface on that. Initial run is negligible impact across the board.
Right.
But I think it's about tidying up some of those outliers.
And when you look at everything, there's nothing that is a tighter correlation of how a guy is going to do in the NFL to how he's done in college from a production standpoint.
Right.
So just the initial run of that stuff, that should be your starting point because it has the highest correlation to anything. Now, obviously, there'll be other things that affect it, say athleticism, whatever. But that appears to be a much sounder foundation to base things on than athleticism. It's just a tighter correlation, a more clear indicator of how a guy's going to do.